Hey, welcome to Hear God's Word. This is Michael Longer. In this podcast, we study and dissect the Bible to better understand what it means and is trying to say. We'll cover theology and dig into the original meaning through language and word studies. We'll even discuss scientific and historical ties, but we'll always come back to the basics. There's so many layers to the Bible, and it's all important. So, if you want to hear what God has to say, then let's dive in. Hey everyone, so today we're going to be going through Genesis 5:28 through the end of the chapter, which is going to be verse 32. And with that said, we're going to wrap up the genealogy of Seth. And it's at least for this time period. And it's going to be significant, and you might want to pay attention to who the last person is in the genealogy. Because again, genealogies aren't as trivial as they might originally seem. And yes, they can be boring. But if you understand it as part of a bigger story, you can read it and be like, hey, yeah, you know what, I enjoy reading this because I know that there's significance behind why they're talking about these specific people. And sometimes the people in the middle are just dots trying to get us to somewhere else. So, in one sense, it can be boring in that fashion because sometimes there's not a lot to the people who are in the dots of the in-between of the genealogy. And yet sometimes they can have significance and you see them appear later in the Bible. And you're like, oh yeah, I remember that so-and-so's ancestor was this person and there was this significant thing that happened with them. So here we go. We're going to jump in and remember we were going through this pattern that we were talking about where first it would go over the name of the ancestor or the father, how many years they lived. Then it would talk about how they became the father of whichever son they passed their main inheritance to. And then it says they lived so many years after. And then they had other sons and daughters. And then it says their entire lifespan was however long, and then they died. So let's see if that pattern holds up for these last people we're going to be talking about. So real quick before we start in chapter 5, verse 28, I wanted to remind you guys of where we left off in the genealogy. We just had Methuselah, who was the longest living person, and then it said he had a son named Lamech. So now let's talk about Lamech. So verse 28 says, when Lamech had lived 182 years, so far so good, he had a son. Okay. He named his son Noah, saying, this one will bring us comfort from our labor and from the painful toil of our hands because of the ground that the Lord has cursed. So here we kind of break the mold again. There's this guy named Noah, and it says the reason why his parents named him that. So it says a couple things here. So first off, Noah's name starts with the first two letters of the word comfort. So basically it's not a root word. However, it is the root letters. And so essentially it's a play on words. because the word for rest in Hebrew is nacham. So, with that said, if you take the ending off, you just have Noach. So, this is indicating something else. And if you notice, there's all these themes that are repeating, and it talks about what Noah was bringing comfort from was the labor and painful toil of the hands. So if you remember, like it says down here, the ground was cursed by the Lord, and the consequences of Adam and Eve's sin, and just the reality of mankind is that men would have to be working hard and laboring, and that it would be painfully hard work. And so here, Noah is a breath of fresh air and comfort to his father, and he's providing some comfort and relief from that. And keep Noah's name in mind, because there just might happen to be something that occurs later again. And so that's why it sometimes can be nice if you have the ability and resources. And as long as you have internet, you can always go on sites like Blue Letter Bible, BibleHub.com, or if you have software like Logos, which I know is pretty expensive, you can look at the original Greek, or you can order online a interlinear Bible, which has the original language and then your language alongside, and it shows which words mean what. And that way you can kind of see the play on words and how the words sound in the Hebrew, or when talking about the New Testament in Greek. So, yeah, the helpful thing is you see these interesting play on words that they have. And so sometimes you're like, why are you naming him Comfort? Does Noah mean comfort? I guess it does. Okay. But, when you look at the Hebrew, it's like, oh, yeah, obviously, Nacham and Noach, obviously, it's like a play on words, and it was clever of the father to name his son that. And so that can be the value of doing a little deeper Bible study, but it doesn't really, in the end, change anything about the overall narrative and story. But you just miss all the details that it's trying to share with you when you don't spend any time digging or trying to understand maybe why he named his son what he did. And then you maybe miss out on future things because you didn't learn it to begin with when it first introduced the name or the topic or the theme. So, with that said, now we're going to go on to verse 30. It says, Lamech lived 595 years. After he became the father of Noah, he had other sons and daughters. So it's repeating and continuing with the pattern. And then it says in verse 31, the entire lifetime of Lamech was 777 years, and then he died. In verse 32, continuing on to Noah, it says, after Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, well, that totally broke up the pattern, and it just ended abruptly there. That's the end of the genealogy. I wonder why. Like, that was, I guess, they wanted to end the conclusion of the genealogy differently with a different pattern. And I will say, I believe it was specifically and intentionally done like that But also take a look at Lamech's age. Remember, I was saying sometimes there is symbolic significance behind the numbers. Well, 7 is the number of completion, like we were talking about, and there's 3 sevens. Possible God lined it up perfectly like that, and it's possible that they didn't actually know his age, or they fudged the numbers a little bit, possibly to make more of a symbolic point. But I would say this kind of stuff is not what the authors are counting all their marbles on. To be honest, I don't know how to tell you to correctly interpret the numbers here. And again, going back to the very first people who ever lived, we have these super long lifespans, and some people call that into question to begin with. But again, there's many factors that could have been different. And so we don't really have at least a current way to confirm these numbers. But at the same time, the Jews did use a lot of symbolic numbers and imagery. So it's possible this was it. Yet at the same time, why would they make up all these arbitrarily out of the ordinary high numbers, other than to communicate that, they did live a long time? All through the future of the Bible, they actually do use the numbers a lot to calculate things. And so one thing that I've tried doing is not spoiling things to come with what we're talking about right now. But yet, at the same time, I want you guys to have heads up and paying attention, so when we do come to stuff, it can be like, hey, remember earlier I said watch out? Well, here we are. And hopefully then it creates epiphanies and helps you to realize the connections that the Bible is making with itself and within the story. And it's taking these true events of human beginning and history, and it's sorting it out and revealing it to us in such a way that we can learn so much greater than if just some ordinary person were to write down information about what stuff was going on towards the beginning of history. This is very craftfully written and inspired by God. And the thing is, this isn't just a story of history, but it's obviously trying to talk about and show people how God was present, involved in working at the beginning of history. And the last part that we're going to go into is, it says Noah lived 500 years, which is another very flat number, and it seems like it's probably a rounded number, but maybe not. Maybe God is lining these things up, because one thing that I've noticed is that there have been several times in my life, or that I've seen with other people, that there's these interesting and crazy coincidences that things line up in a very neat and guided manner. And at the same time, God also throws us off our horse a lot of times and leaves us with things that we wouldn't ever add up ourselves. But then he still even points some of those things out to us. So here we have an interesting straight number, 500. And so Noah is 500 years old by the time he's had 3 different sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It doesn't say that he had other sons and daughters, but most likely, since all of the others did, and he had 500 years, I'm pretty sure he did have other sons and daughters. So, with that said, we haven't really talked about Noah. This is actually the Noah, the one who built the ark. And so obviously I just gave away what's going to happen in the future. But at the same time, I won't talk about and spoil all the details. But maybe that's why the genealogy has stopped right here. There's about to become an event that ends up being the reason and cause for the abrupt end to the genealogy. And when we get there, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And the last thing that I want to mention is the three sons of Noah. Again, even though we ended with these three people, it doesn't mean that the story with these three people ends necessarily. So, like I said, remember Shem, Ham, and Japheth, because I'll just give you a hint, they are going to show up again really soon, and they're going to actually be critical and vital for the entire rest of human history. With that said, we're going to end it here. The genealogy for now is over, and we're about to start on a new quest and storyline going along with what we were just ending off on with the story of Noah. Hey, I'm so glad you guys could join for today's podcast. I hope things clicked for you and that you're able to better understand God's word. Jesus said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." So, keep on listening to what God has to say, and I'll see you guys next time. God bless.